The morning sun poured through the towering glass windows of the Fulton County Courthouse in Atlanta, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floors. The air inside Courtroom 3B crackled with tension, the kind that settles in when lives hang in the balance. At the defendant's table sat Jamal Carter, a 28-year-old black man with broad shoulders and a quiet intensity. His deep brown eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail: the prosecutor's smug smirk, the hushed whispers from the gallery, the jury's guarded glances. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles pale from the pressure. Beside him, his older sister, Maya Carter, sat with a calm that belied the storm brewing beneath. Her long black hair was neatly pulled back, her navy blazer crisp and professional. Maya's face was a mask of composure, but her eyes burned with a resolve that could unsettle anyone who dared meet her gaze. Jamal leaned toward her, his voice low and laced with worry. "Maya, these people are looking at me like I'm already guilty. What if this goes south?" Maya's hand found his forearm, her touch steadying. "Stay focused, Jamal," she whispered, her tone firm but warm. "The truth doesn't bend to their stares. We're gonna get through this." Her words were a lifeline, and Jamal nodded, though the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. He'd always been the strong one in their family, the one who cracked jokes to lighten the mood. But weeks of relentless accusations had worn him down. The charge resisting arrest hung over him like a guillotine, despite clear video evidence showing he'd done nothing to provoke the officer's aggression. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and a hush fell over the courtroom as Judge Raymond Holt strode in, his black robe billowing like a storm cloud. In his late 60s, with a hawkish nose and thinning gray hair, Holt carried an air of self-assured authority that bordered on arrogance. His reputation for being tough wasn't just talk. It was etched into the faces of those who'd stood before him, hoping for fairness and finding none. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice booming off the wood-paneled walls. Holt settled into his high-backed chair, his eyes sweeping the room with a disdain that barely masked his boredom. They landed on Maya, and his lips twitched into a faint, condescending smirk. "Let's make this quick," he muttered, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. Maya didn't flinch. She'd faced men like Holt before, men who saw her skin before her strength, her gender before her intellect. Years of navigating high-stakes environments had taught her to let their arrogance slide off her like rain on glass. At the prosecutor's table, Assistant DA Nathan Blake stood with a theatrical flourish, adjusting his tie as if stepping onto a stage. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and confident, "the evidence against the defendant is airtight. This is a clear case of disrespect for law enforcement, and no amount of spin can change the facts." Maya's jaw tightened, but she remained still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She'd promised Jamal she'd let the lawyers do their job, even if every instinct screamed for her to stand and call out Blake's lies. Blake's words painted Jamal as a volatile threat, a man who'd lashed out at an officer during a routine traffic stop. Each exaggeration twisted the knife deeper, and Maya's stomach churned. She knew the truth. Jamal had been pulled over for a broken taillight, but the officer had escalated things, shoving him against the car without cause. The body cam footage, which Blake conveniently downplayed, showed Jamal's hands raised, his voice calm. But truth didn't always win in rooms like this. When Blake finished, he sat with a satisfied grin, as if he'd already secured a conviction. Holt turned to the defense attorney, a young public defender named Ethan Walsh, who seemed to shrink under the judge's gaze. "Well," Holt barked, his tone sharp, "do you have anything worth hearing? Or are we just wasting time?" Walsh stumbled through his opening, his voice barely carrying. Maya felt a pang of frustration. Ethan was well-meaning but outmatched, his inexperience a liability against Blake's polished performance. As the trial unfolded, Holt's bias became painfully clear. He cut off Walsh's objections with a wave of his hand, rolled his eyes when the defense presented evidence, and sighed audibly when Maya rose to testify as a character witness. "Ms. Carter," Holt drawled, leaning back in his chair, "I hope you're not here to bore us with emotional nonsense. This court deals in facts, not feelings." The gallery murmured, a mix of amusement and unease, but Maya met his gaze without blinking. I'm here to speak the truth, Your Honor, she said evenly, nothing more, nothing less. A ripple of whispers spread through the room, silenced by Holt's glare. Very well, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Enlighten us. Maya stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Every eye was on her, the weight of their expectations pressing down, but she stood tall. She'd faced worse than this: covert operations, life or death decisions, moments where a single misstep could cost everything. A pompous judge wasn't going to rattle her. She spoke clearly, recounting the night of Jamal's arrest, how he'd been on his way home from work, how the officer had targeted him without cause, how the video showed Jamal complying despite the aggression. But Holt interrupted her repeatedly, his patience thinning with each word. Ms. Carter, he said with a chuckle, you seem to think you're some kind of legal scholar. Tell me, do you have any actual expertise, or are you just playing advocate for your brother? The question landed like a jab, and the gallery erupted in muffled laughter. Jamal's hands clenched into fists, but Maya's expression didn't waver. She felt a spark of anger but smothered it. Her training kicking in. Control the moment, don't let it control you. With all due respect, Your Honor, she replied, her voice steady. My testimony is based on what I saw and what the evidence shows. I trust this court values the truth. Holt's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. Truth is for the jury to decide, Ms. Carter, not you. He waved her back to her seat, dismissing her like a child. As Maya sat, Jamal leaned close, his voice a harsh whisper. He's not even listening, Maya. This is a setup. She placed a hand on his, her touch grounding. It's not over, she murmured. Trust me. What Holt didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Maya Carter was far more than a concerned sister. She'd spent the last decade as an FBI cybersecurity analyst, dismantling digital threats and navigating the underbelly of power. Her badge, tucked inside her blazer, was a secret she'd held back, waiting for the right moment. And that moment was coming. The morning dragged on, each minute heavier than the last. Walsh introduced the body cam footage, but Blake spun it as inconclusive, claiming Jamal's body language suggested resistance. Holt nodded along, his bias blatant. When Walsh tried to call a witness a bystander who'd recorded the arrest, Holt dismissed it as irrelevant. We're not here to chase amateur videos. He snapped. Maya's grip on the table tightened, her nails pressing into the wood. She'd seen this playbook before. Deflect, dismiss, dominate. But she wasn't here to play their game. She was here to break it. As the session neared a recess, Blake launched into another tirade, painting Jamal as a danger to society. Maya's patience frayed, her calm exterior cracking just enough for her to rise again. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. May I address the court directly? Holt raised an eyebrow, a mix of amusement and irritation crossing his face. Ms. Carter, you've had your say. Unless you've got something new, sit down. Maya didn't move. She stepped forward, her heels echoing in the silent room. I have something very relevant to say, she said, her tone calm but unyielding. Something this court needs to hear. Holt leaned back, clearly unimpressed. Make it quick, he said, gesturing lazily. I've got better things to do. Maya reached into her blazer, her movements deliberate. The room held its breath as she pulled out a small black wallet and flipped it open. The FBI badge inside caught the light, gleaming like a challenge. My name, she said, her voice steady and deliberate, is Special Agent Maya Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The courtroom erupted in gasps, a wave of shock rippling through the gallery. Blake's jaw dropped, his confidence evaporating. Walsh stared, wide-eyed, as if seeing Maya for the first time. Even the jury shifted, their guarded expressions giving way to curiosity. Holt, however, froze, his smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. For the first time that day, he seemed at a loss, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Maya didn't wait for him to recover. I've spent 10 years serving this country, she continued, her voice unwavering. I've investigated corruption, protected lives, and upheld the law. And I will not stand by while this court twists justice to fit a narrative of bias and power. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Holt opened his mouth, then closed it, his face reddening. The gallery buzzed, the tension electric. Maya turned to the jury, her badge still visible. "You're here to decide my brother's fate," she said, her tone softening but losing none of its strength. "But you're also here to decide what justice means. My brother is not a criminal. He's a man who was targeted, like so many others, for the color of his skin. I'm asking you to see the truth." Holt banged his gavel, the sound desperate. "Order," he barked, but his voice lacked its earlier bite. "Agent Carter, you're out of line." Maya met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Your Honor," she said quietly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The room fell silent, every eye on her. Jamal watched his sister, a mix of awe and hope in his eyes. For the first time, he felt the tide might be turning. Maya returned to her seat, her badge glinting on the table like a silent promise. Holt adjusted his robe, his movements stiff. "This court will take a recess," he said, his voice tight. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour." He banged his gavel again and stood, his robe billowing as he exited. But the sound of that gavel felt hollow, a faint echo of a man who'd just lost control of his own courtroom. As the gallery murmured, Maya leaned toward Jamal. "We're just getting started," she whispered, and as the weight of her words settled, she knew the fight was far from over. But for the first time, justice felt within reach. The Atlanta sunrise painted the Fulton County Courthouse in hues of orange and pink. But inside Courtroom 3B, the atmosphere was anything but warm. The third day of Jamal Carter's trial crackled with a tension that felt alive, coiling around every word and glance. Maya Carter sat at the defendant's table, her navy blazer crisp, her posture unyielding. Her FBI badge was tucked away, but its weight hung over the room like a storm cloud. Yesterday's revelation had shifted the dynamics. Judge Raymond Holt's smug control had cracked. Nathan Blake's slick confidence had faltered, and the jury was starting to question the narrative. But Maya knew the fight was far from won. The system was a machine, and men like Holt were its gears, grinding down anyone who dared challenge it. Jamal leaned toward her, his voice a low murmur. "Maya, you think that video made a difference? Some of the jury were looking at me different yesterday." Maya's eyes flicked to the jury box, where the 12 men and women were filing in, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. "It's a start," she whispered, her tone steady. "But we need more than looks. We need them to feel the truth." Her words were calm, but her mind was racing. Last night, she'd stayed up until dawn, poring over case files and waiting for a message from Marcus Reed, her former FBI colleague. Marcus had promised intel on Officer Daniel Price, the cop whose lies were the backbone of the prosecution's case. If Marcus came through, it could be the key to dismantling Blake's story. The oak doors groaned open, and Judge Holt swept in, his black robe billowing like a warning. His face was a mask of forced neutrality, but Maya caught the strain in his eyes, the way his hands twitched as he gripped the gavel. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice booming. Holt settled into his chair, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Maya. For a moment, their eyes locked, and she saw a flicker of something: resentment, maybe, or fear. "Let's keep this moving," Holt said, his tone sharp. "Mr. Blake, call your next witness." Nathan Blake rose, his tie perfectly knotted, his smile practiced but strained. "Your Honor, the prosecution rests," he said, his voice smooth. "We've presented clear evidence of the defendant's resistance, corroborated by Officer Price's testimony." Maya's jaw tightened. Blake was playing it safe, banking on Price's lies and Holt's bias to carry the day. She glanced at Ethan Walsh, the defense attorney, who was rifling through his notes with a nervous energy. Ethan had gained some confidence after Maya's stand, but he was still out of his depth against Blake's polish. Walsh stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, the defense calls a new witness, Samuel Hayes." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Maya's pulse quickened. Samuel Hayes was the wild card she'd been waiting for, a retired Atlanta PD officer who'd reached out to her anonymously 2 days ago. Through Marcus, she'd verified his identity and learned he'd been at the scene of Jamal's arrest, off-duty but present. Hayes claimed to have seen everything, and his account contradicted Price's story. Getting him to testify had been a gamble, Retired cops rarely turned on their own, and Hayes had his own baggage, a disciplinary record that Blake could exploit. But Maya had no choice. The videos weren't enough, and Hayes was their best shot at cracking the case open. The courtroom doors opened, and Samuel Hayes walked in. He was in his late 50s, stocky, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of too many years on the beat. His steps were deliberate, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Jamal. Maya studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides. He was nervous, but he was here. That was what mattered. Hayes took the stand, swearing in with a voice that was gruff but steady. Walsh approached, his questions careful. "Mr. Hayes, can you confirm you were present at the scene of Mr. Carter's arrest on March 12th? Hayes nodded. "Yeah, I was there, off duty, grabbing coffee at the gas station across the street. Saw the whole thing." The gallery buzzed, and Holt's gavel cracked. "Order," he snapped, but his eyes were fixed on Hayes, wary. Walsh pressed on. "And what did you see?" Hayes shifted, his gaze flicking to Jamal, then back to Walsh. Carter wasn't resisting. He had his hands up, was talking calm. Price came at him hard, no reason. Shoved him against the car, cuffed him rough. Didn't look like protocol to me. The room erupted in whispers, and Maya felt a surge of hope. Hayes's words were simple but damning, a direct challenge to Price's testimony. She glanced at the jury, catching the widened eyes of a young woman in the front row, the furrowed brow of an older man. They were listening, but Blake was already on his feet, his voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. This witness's account is uncorroborated, and his credibility is questionable given his history with the department." Maya's stomach twisted. Blake was going for the jugular, and Hayes's past a suspension for insubordination 5 years ago was an easy target. Holt leaned forward, his tone icy. "Mr. Walsh, care to explain why I should entertain this witness?" Walsh hesitated, but Maya leaned toward him, her voice a low hiss. "Push his experience. He was a cop for 25 years. He knows protocol." Walsh nodded, turning to Holt. "Your Honor, Mr. Hayes served the Atlanta PD for over 2 decades. His experience makes him uniquely qualified to assess Officer Price's actions." Holt's lips pressed into a thin line, but he waved a hand. "Proceed." "But I'm watching closely," Walsh continued, drawing out Hayes's account, how Price had ignored Jamal's compliance, how the stop felt targeted. Hayes's voice grew firmer as he spoke, as if shedding years of silence. "I've seen good cops and bad ones," he said. "What Price did wasn't right. Carter didn't deserve it." Maya watched the jury, noting the shift in their postures, the way they leaned forward. Hayes was connecting, his gruff honesty cutting through Blake's polish. But Blake wasn't done. On cross-examination, he pounced, his tone dripping with disdain. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it true you were suspended for defying orders? That you left the department under a cloud?" Hayes's jaw tightened, but he held Blake's gaze. "Yeah, I was suspended. Stood up to a captain who was covering up misconduct. Guess that makes me a problem to some." The gallery murmured, and Maya suppressed a smile. Hayes was turning Blake's attack into a badge of honor. But Blake pressed harder, painting Hayes as a disgruntled ex-cop with an axe to grind. "So we're to believe you, a man with a record, over an active officer?" Hayes leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Believe what you want. I know what I saw." Holt banged his gavel as the gallery buzzed again. "Enough," he snapped, his face reddening. "Mr. Hayes, you're dismissed." Hayes stepped down, his eyes meeting Maya's for a brief moment. She gave him a subtle nod, a silent thank you. His testimony had landed, but Blake's attack had muddied the waters. Maya's phone vibrated in her pocket, and she glanced at it under the table. A message from Marcus Reed. "Got something on Price. Check your email. Big." Her pulse quickened. Marcus had come through, but she couldn't check it now, not with Holt's eyes boring into her. Walsh called Maya back to the stand, hoping to build on Hayes's momentum. She rose, her heels clicking against the marble, every step deliberate. Holt's gaze followed her, his expression a mix of irritation and wariness. "Agent Carter," he said, his tone sharp, "I hope you have something new to offer." Maya stood tall, her voice clear. "I do, Your Honor." As an FBI cybersecurity analyst, I analyzed the metadata of the bystander video. It confirms the timestamp aligns with Officer Price's report, but the audio reveals discrepancies in his account. The gallery gasped, and Blake shot to his feet. Objection. This is speculation, not evidence. Maya didn't flinch. It's not speculation, she said, her tone calm but cutting. I can provide the forensic report, verified by the FBI's digital lab. Holt's face darkened, but he waved Blake down. Submit the report, Agent Carter, but tread carefully. Maya nodded, stepping down as Walsh handed the report to the clerk. She'd bought them time, but Holt's bias was a wall they hadn't breached. As the session broke for lunch, Jamal turned to her, his voice low. You're tearing it up, Maya, but Holt's still against us. She squeezed his hand. He's digging his own grave, Jamal. We just need to keep pushing. In the hallway, Maya slipped away to a quiet corner and opened Marcus's email. It was a bombshell, a disciplinary file on Price, buried by the department, detailing prior complaints of excessive force, all dismissed. There was more, a text exchange between Price and another officer, hinting at targeting certain types during stops. Maya's heart raced. This could change everything, but getting it admitted would be a fight. She texted Marcus, "Meet me tonight. We need a plan." As she rejoined Jamal, the weight of the day settled on her shoulders. The truth was within reach, but the battle was only heating up. The midday sun hung high over Atlanta, its heat seeping through the Fulton County Courthouse's windows. But inside Courtroom 3B, the atmosphere was colder, sharper, charged with a tension that seemed to hum in the air. Maya Carter sat at the defendant's table, her navy blazer a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions swirling beneath her composed exterior. Her revelation as an FBI cybersecurity analyst had shaken the trial's foundation, and Samuel Hayes' testimony as a retired cop had cracked the prosecution's narrative. But Maya knew the battle was far from over. Judge Raymond Holt's bias was a steel wall, and Nathan Blake's cunning was a snake waiting to strike. The truth was on their side, but truth alone didn't win in rooms like this. It needed a champion, and Maya was ready to be that. Jamal Carter sat beside her, his hands no longer gripping the table but still restless, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm. "Maya," he whispered, his voice low. "That cop Hazy put it all out there. You think the jury's feeling it?" Maya's eyes flicked to the jury box, where the 12 faces were a mix of intrigue and uncertainty. "They're listening," she murmured, her tone steady. "But Blake's gonna hit back hard. We need to be ready." Her mind was already racing, replaying the email from Marcus Reed she'd read during the lunch break. The disciplinary file on Officer Daniel Price complaints of excessive force. Buried by the department was a grenade. The text messages hinting at racial targeting were the pin. If she could get them admitted, it would blow Blake's case apart. But Holt's gatekeeping made that a steep climb. The courtroom. Doors swung open, and Judge Holt strode in, his black robe sweeping the floor like a shadow. His face was a mask of control, but Maya caught the tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes avoided hers as he took his seat. "Court is now in session," the bailiff boomed. Holt gripped his gavel, his knuckles pale. "Mr. Walsh, proceed with your case," he said, his voice clipped. Ethan Walsh, the defense attorney, stood, his earlier hesitation replaced by a quiet determination. Maya's influence had steadied him, and Samuel Hayes' testimony had given him a foothold. "Your Honor," Walsh began, "we'd like to recall Agent Maya Carter to elaborate on the forensic analysis she mentioned earlier." Holt's eyes narrowed, but he waved a hand. "Fine, but keep it relevant, Mr. Walsh." Maya rose, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step a declaration of purpose. The gallery watched, their whispers a low buzz. Reporters in the back leaned forward, pens poised. Blake sat at the prosecution table, his smile tight, like a man who knew the ground was shifting but refused to admit it. Maya took the stand, swearing in with a voice that was calm but carried an edge. Walsh approached, his questions precise. "Agent Carter, can you explain the significance of the audio discrepancies you found in the bystander video?" Maya nodded, her gaze sweeping the jury. "The video's audio captures Officer Price's commands and Mr. Carter's responses, Price claimed my brother was non-compliant, but the audio shows Jamal saying, "I'm cooperating, sir," multiple times before the shove. The metadata confirms the recording wasn't tampered with, and the timestamps align with Price's own report. The jury leaned forward, a few jotting notes. Maya pressed on, her voice steady. These discrepancies suggest Officer Price misrepresented the encounter, which calls his entire testimony into question, the gallery murmured, and Blake shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Agent Carter is speculating on the officer's intent, which is beyond her expertise." Maya's eyes flicked to Blake. Unflinching, "It's not speculation," she said, her tone cutting. "It's analysis based on verifiable data, which I'm trained to conduct." Holt banged his gavel, his face reddening. "Sustained," he snapped. "Agent Carter, stick to the facts." Maya nodded, stepping down, but not before catching the jury's shifting expressions. Doubt was taking root, and Blake knew it. Walsh seized the moment, calling for the disciplinary file on Price. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a folder, "we have evidence of prior complaints against Officer Price, including excessive force, which speaks to his credibility." Blake leapt up, his voice sharp. "Objection, this is inadmissible hearsay, and the defense is attempting to smear a decorated officer." Holt leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Mr. Walsh, you're treading on thin ice. Why should I allow this?" Walsh glanced at Maya, drawing strength from her nod. "Your Honor, these complaints establish a pattern of behavior relevant to this case. The jury deserves to know." Holt's lips pressed into a thin line, but the weight of the gallery's scrutiny and Maya's FBI credentials forced his hand. "I'll allow it," he said grudgingly, "but I'm limiting its scope." "Proceed." Walsh handed the file to the clerk, and Maya exhaled, her mind racing. The file was a start, but the text messages Marcus had uncovered were the real weapon. She needed to get them admitted without tipping her hand too soon. Blake, sensing the shift, launched into a furious redirect, painting Price as a hero under attack. "These complaints were dismissed," he said, pacing before the jury. "They're irrelevant to the defendant's actions." Maya's phone vibrated in her pocket, and she glanced at it discreetly. Another message from Marcus. "Meet me at the diner on Peachtree, 8 p.m. Got more on Price audio." Her heart skipped. Audio could be a game changer, but she'd need to verify it before risking it in court. As Walsh wrapped up, Holt announced a brief recess, his gavel striking with a hollow thud. Maya and Jamal stepped into the hallway, the air cooler but heavy with unspoken stakes. Jamal ran a hand over his face, his voice low. "Maya, that file it's something. But Blake's twist in it. You got anything else up your sleeve?" Maya's eyes met his, fierce but warm. "I'm working on it." "Jamal, trust me." He nodded, but the weight of uncertainty lingered in his posture. Maya slipped away to a quiet corner, pulling up Marcus's earlier email on her phone. The text messages between Price and another officer were damning. "Gotta keep these types in check. Pick the right ones. Nobody asks questions." Her stomach churned. The messages were explosive, but getting them past Holt's gatekeeping would require a miracle or a trap. She texted Marcus, "Need chain of custody for the texts. Can you get it by tonight?" Back in the courtroom, the session resumed with Blake calling a surprise witness, Officer Price's partner, Lisa Torres. Torres, a stern woman in her 30s, took the stand, her testimony rehearsed. "Mr. Carter was aggressive," she said, her voice flat. "He ignored commands, made sudden movements. Officer Price acted to protect himself." Maya's blood boiled, but she kept her composure, noting Torres's avoidance of eye contact with the jury. Walsh's cross-examination was tentative, barely scratching her story. Holt, predictably, shut down any push to challenge her credibility. "We're not here to dissect every officer's actions," he snapped. Maya leaned toward Walsh, her voice a low hiss. "Ask about her position during the stop. The video shows she was behind the car, not close enough to see Jamal's movements." Walsh nodded, pressing Torres on her vantage point. She hesitated, her confidence wavering. "I was close enough," she said, but the jury caught the dodge, their expressions shifting. Maya seized the opening, rising to address Holt. "Your Honor, The defense requests to recall the bystander video to clarify Officer Torres's position. Blake objected, but Holt, cornered by the jury's attention, allowed it. The video played again, showing Torres far from the action, contradicting her claim. The gallery buzzed, and Maya saw the jury's doubt deepen. As the day drew to a close, Holt adjourned the session, his gavel striking with less force than before. Maya gathered her things, her mind on the meeting with Marcus. Jamal turned to her, his voice a mix of hope and fear. "We're getting somewhere, right? I felt it in there." Maya squeezed his shoulder. "We're moving the needle, Jamal. But we're not done." As they left the courthouse, the Atlanta skyline glowed against a fading sky. Maya's thoughts were on the audio Marcus had promised. If it was what she hoped, it could shatter Price's credibility and Holt's control. The fight was escalating, and Maya was ready to meet it head-on. The Atlanta air was thick with the weight of an approaching storm, gray clouds rolling over the Fulton County Courthouse. As the fourth day of Jamal Carter's trial dawned, inside Courtroom 3B, the tension was a living thing, wrapping itself around every word, every glance, every breath. Maya Carter sat at the defendant's table, her navy blazer a shield against the chaos of the room. Her FBI cybersecurity expertise had turned the trial into a battleground, and Samuel Hayes' testimony, paired with Officer Daniel Price's buried disciplinary file, had chipped away at the prosecution's case. But Maya knew the war wasn't won. Judge Raymond Holt's bias was a fortress, and Nathan Blake's cunning was a blade, sharp and relentless. The truth was gaining ground, but it needed a decisive blow to break through. Jamal leaned toward her, his voice a hushed mix of hope and nerves. "Maya, that file on Price, it's got Blake rattled, right? I saw his face yesterday." Maya's eyes flicked to the prosecution table, where Blake was adjusting his tie with a forced calm. "He's rattled," she murmured. "But he's not down. Stay sharp, Jamal. We're in deep now." Her mind was on the meeting she'd had with Marcus Reed last night at a dimly lit diner. On Peachtree Street, Marcus, her former FBI colleague, had delivered a USB drive with an audio file, a recorded conversation between Price and another officer, captured by a whistleblower in the department. The audio was damning, with Price bragging about teaching lessons to certain types during stops. But admitting it in court was a minefield. Maya had spent the night verifying its chain of custody, knowing Holt would pounce on any technicality. The courtroom doors swung open, and Judge Holt strode in, his black robe billowing like a warning flag. His face was a mask of authority, but Maya caught the strain in his posture, the way his hands clenched the gavel as he sat. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Holt's eyes swept the room, lingering on Maya with a mix of wariness and resentment. "Mr. Walsh, proceed," he said, his tone sharp. Ethan Walsh, the defense attorney, stood, his confidence bolstered by Maya's strategic nudges. "Your Honor," Walsh began, "we'd like to introduce new evidence, an audio recording relevant to Officer Price's conduct." The gallery buzzed, and Blake shot to his feet, his voice laced with alarm. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a last-minute stunt, and we've had no time to review this so-called evidence." Maya's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd anticipated this. Walsh held up a folder, his voice steady. "Your Honor, the audio was obtained legally and verified by FBI protocols. It directly pertains to Officer Price's credibility and his actions during Mr. Carter's arrest." Holt's eyes narrowed, his fingers tapping the bench. "Approach," he snapped, beckoning both attorneys. Maya watched as Walsh and Blake argued at the bench, their voices low but heated. She caught fragments Blake's insistence on ambush tactics, Walsh's calm defense of the audio's relevance. Holt's face darkened, but the weight of Maya's FBI credentials and the gallery's scrutiny forced his hand. "I'll allow it," he said finally, his voice tight. "But I'm holding a short leash, Murdoch Walsh. No theatrics." Blake returned to his table, his jaw clenched, while Walsh nodded to Maya, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. The audio played through the courtroom's speakers, crackling at first, then clear. Price's voice was unmistakable, smug and casual. "You gotta pick the right ones, man. Nobody questions a stop in that neighborhood. Teach 'em a lesson, they stay in line. The second officer's laugh was audible, followed by Price's chuckle. The gallery gasped, and the jury's faces shifted shock, disgust, doubt. Maya watched them closely, noting the young woman in the front row who clutched her notepad, the older man who shook his head. The audio was a gut punch, and Blake knew it. He stood, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, this recording is out of context. There's no proof it relates to this case." Maya rose, her movements deliberate. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "The audio was recorded 2 weeks before my brother's arrest in the same precinct. The metadata, verified by the FBI, confirms its authenticity. It shows a pattern of bias that directly undermines Officer Price's testimony." The gallery erupted in murmurs, and Holt's gavel slammed down. "Order," he barked, his face flushed. "Agent Carter, you are not counsel. Sit down." Maya held his gaze for a moment, then sat, her point made. The jury had heard her, and that was what mattered. Blake launched into damage control, recalling Price to the stand. Price, visibly shaken, claimed the audio was just talk, not reflective of his actions. But his earlier confidence was gone, his answers halting under Walsh's cross-examination. "So you admit to discussing targeting certain individuals?" Walsh pressed. Price squirmed, his voice weak. "It was just locker room talk, nothing serious." The jury's expressions hardened, and Maya felt a surge of hope. The cracks in Price's story were widening, and Blake's case was crumbling. But Blake wasn't finished. He called a new witness, Captain Robert Gaines, Price's supervisor. Gaines, a stern man in his 50s, took the stand, his testimony a wall of authority. "Officer Price is one of our best," he said, his voice firm. "His actions during the stop were by the book. The audio is being misconstrued." Maya's stomach twisted. Gaines was a heavy hitter, his rank lending weight to Price's lies. Walsh's cross-examination faltered, unable to dent Gaines's polished facade. Holt, predictably, shut down any attempt to challenge the captain's credibility. "We're not here to question the department's integrity," he snapped. Maya leaned toward Walsh, her voice a low hiss. "Ask about the whistleblower." Gaines signed off on burying Price's complaints. "He's not clean." Walsh hesitated, then nodded, pressing Gaines on the disciplinary file. "Captain, were you aware of complaints against Officer Price before this case?" Gaines's eyes flickered, but he answered smoothly. "All complaints were investigated and dismissed." Walsh pushed harder, citing the file, but Holt cut him off. "Enough," he said, his tone final. "The captain's testimony stands." Maya's frustration boiled, but she kept it locked down. She needed to pivot. During a brief recess, she stepped into the hallway and checked her phone. A new message from Marcus, "Whistleblowers ready to talk. Ex-cop, knows Gaines's dirt. Meet tonight." Her heart raced. A second whistleblower could tie Gaines to Price's misconduct, but it was a risk. Exposing internal corruption could backfire, painting the defense as desperate. She texted back, "Set it up. I need everything." Back in the courtroom, Walsh called Maya to testify again, hoping to reinforce the audio's impact. She took the stand, her voice clear. "The audio isn't isolated," she said, addressing the jury. "It aligns with a pattern of complaints against Officer Price, all dismissed under Captain Gaines's oversight. This isn't about one stop, it's about a system that protects its own over the truth." Blake objected, but Holt allowed her to continue, his reluctance clear. Maya's words landed, the jury's faces reflecting a growing unease. She stepped down, catching a nod from the young woman juror, a sign the tide was turning. As the session adjourned, Holt's gavel struck with a hollow thud. Jamal turned to Maya, his eyes wide. "That audio, it hit hard, Maya. We're close, aren't we?" She squeezed his hand, her voice firm. "We're closer, Jamal, but we're not there yet." As they left the courthouse, the storm clouds broke, rain pelting the pavement. Maya's thoughts were on the whistleblower. If Marcus's contact delivered, it could be the key to dismantling Gaines's testimony and Holt's control. The fight was escalating, and Maya was ready to strike. Rain streaked down the windows of the Fulton County Courthouse. The Atlanta skyline blurred under a heavy gray sky. as the fifth day of Jamal Carter's trial unfolded. Inside Courtroom 3B, the air was electric, charged with a tension that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. Maya Carter sat at the defendant's table, her navy blazer a quiet armor against the storm of the trial. Her FBI cybersecurity expertise, the damning audio of Officer Daniel Price, and the cracks in Captain Robert Gaines's testimony had tilted the scales. But the fight was far from over. Judge Raymond Holt's bias was a relentless barrier, and Nathan Blake's cunning was a coiled trap, ready to snap. Maya knew the truth was winning ground, but it needed a final push to break through the system's defenses. Jamal leaned toward her, his voice a low murmur, his eyes flickering with cautious hope. "Maya, that audio yesterday, it shook em. I saw the jury's faces. We're getting through, right?" Maya's gaze flicked to the jury box, where the 12 faces were settling in, their expressions a mix of intrigue and unease. "We're breaking through," she whispered, her tone steady but urgent. "But Blake's got one more play, and Holt's still in his corner. We gotta stay sharp." Her mind was on the meeting she'd had with Marcus Reed late last night, in a cramped backroom of a downtown bar. Marcus's whistleblower, a former Atlanta PD officer named Carla Evans, had delivered a bombshell, a signed memo from Gaines, authorizing the dismissal of Price's complaints despite internal objections. If Maya could get it into evidence, it would tie Gaines to a cover-up and shred Price's credibility. But Evans was hesitant, fearing retaliation. Maya had until tonight to convince her. The courtroom doors swung open, and Judge Holt strode in, his black robe cutting through the air like a blade. His face was a mask of control, but Maya caught the faint tremor in his hands as he gripped the gavel. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice booming. Holt sat, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on Maya with a cold intensity. "Mr. Blake." "Proceed," he said, his tone sharp. Nathan Blake rose, his tie pristine, his smile a calculated mask. "Your Honor, we'd like to call a final witness to clarify the events of the arrest, Dr. Allen Kessler, a use-of-force expert." The gallery murmured, and Maya's stomach tightened. Kessler was a hired gun, a professional witness who'd testify for whoever paid him. Blake was pulling out all the stops to shore up Price's story. Ethan Walsh, the defense attorney, glanced at Maya, his nerves evident. She nodded subtly, urging him to stay focused. Kessler took the stand, a weary man in his 60s with a clipped voice and an air of authority. "Based on my analysis," Kessler said, addressing the jury, "Officer Price's actions were consistent with standard protocol. The defendant's body language, as described, posed a potential threat, justifying the use of force." Maya's jaw clenched, but she kept her composure, noting Kessler's careful wording. He hadn't seen the video, only Price's report, which Blake had conveniently framed. Walsh's cross-examination was shaky, unable to dent Kessler's credentials. Holt, predictably, blocked any attempt to challenge the expert's bias. "We're not here to debate Dr. Kessler's qualifications," he snapped. Maya leaned toward Walsh, her voice a low hiss. "Ask about the video." "He didn't analyze it." "Push that." Walsh nodded, pressing Kessler on whether he'd reviewed the bystander footage. Kessler hesitated, then admitted he'd relied on Price's account. The jury stirred, catching the gap, but Blake quickly redirected, reinforcing Kessler's expertise. Maya's frustration simmered, but she pivoted. During a brief recess, she stepped into the hallway and called Marcus. "Carla's our shot," she said, her voice urgent. "I need that memo today, and I need her to testify. Can you get her to commit?" Marcus's voice crackled through the line. "She's scared, Maya. Her pension's on the line. But I'm working on her. I'll have something by tonight." Maya hung up, her mind racing. The memo was critical, but Carla's testimony would seal it. She needed to tread carefully. Pushing too hard could spook her. Back in the courtroom, Walsh called Maya to the stand, hoping to counter Kessler's testimony. She rose, her heels clicking against the marble, each step a declaration of resolve. Holt's eyes followed her, his expression a mix of irritation and caution. "Agent Carter," he said, his tone icy, "I trust you have something substantive to add." Maya stood tall, her voice clear. "I do, Your Honor, as an FBI analyst. I've reviewed use of force protocols extensively. Dr. Kessler's analysis ignores the video evidence, which shows no threat from my brother. Officer Price's actions weren't protocol, they were excessive. The gallery buzzed, and Blake objected, his voice sharp. Agent Carter is not a use of force expert. Maya didn't flinch. I'm an expert in evidence analysis, she said, her tone cutting, and the evidence contradicts Dr. Kessler's conclusions. Holt banged his gavel, his face reddening. Sustained, he snapped. Agent Carter, you're pushing the line. Maya stepped down, but not before catching the jury's shifting expressions. The young woman in the front row nodded slightly, a sign the seeds of doubt were taking root. Walsh seized the moment, requesting to introduce the memo from Carla Evans. Your Honor, he said, holding up a document. This memo, signed by Captain Gaines, shows he dismissed complaints against Officer Price despite internal objections. It proves a pattern of misconduct. Blake leapt up, his voice frantic. Objection. This is unverified and inflammatory. Holt leaned forward, his eyes glinting. Mr. Walsh, you're skating on thin ice. Where did this come from? Walsh glanced at Maya, then answered. It was provided by a credible source within the Atlanta PD, Your Honor. We can verify its authenticity. Holt's lips pressed into a thin line, but the gallery's scrutiny and Maya's FBI credentials forced his hand. Submit it for review, he said grudgingly. But I'm not ruling on admissibility yet. Maya exhaled, her mind on Carla. If she could get her to testify, the memo would be undeniable. Blake, sensing the shift, launched into a furious redirect, painting the memo as a smear campaign. The defense is desperate, he told the jury, pacing. They're attacking the department to distract from the defendant's actions. Maya's phone vibrated, and she glanced at it under the table. A text from Marcus, Carla's in. She'll testify tomorrow. Memo's legit. You owe me big. Her heart raced. This was the break they needed, but it came with a cost. Carla's testimony would expose her to the department's wrath, and Maya would have to protect her. As the session broke for lunch, Jamal turned to her, his eyes wide. Maya, that memo, it's huge, right? We're close. She squeezed his hand, her voice firm. We're closer. Jamal, but we're walking a tightrope now. In the hallway, Maya slipped away to a quiet corner and called Carla. You're doing the right thing, she said, her tone warm but urgent. I'll make sure you're protected. Carla's voice was shaky but resolute. I'm tired of staying quiet. Agent Carter, but I'm scared. Maya's heart softened. I know, but you're not alone. Hanging up, she felt the weight of her promise. Protecting Carla meant risking her own career, but she'd made that choice the moment she stood up for Jamal. Back in the courtroom, the session resumed with Blake calling a final witness, a civilian who claimed to have seen Jamal acting erratically before the stop. The testimony was flimsy, but Holt allowed it, shutting down Walsh's objections. Maya leaned toward Walsh, her voice low. Check the witness's social media. I bet Blake coached him. Walsh nodded, passing a note to his paralegal. As the day drew to a close, Holt adjourned the session, his gavel striking with a hollow thud. Jamal turned to Maya, his voice a mix of hope and fear. We're almost there, right? I can feel it. Maya met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. We're close, Jamal. Tomorrow, we finish this. As they left the courthouse, the rain had stopped, the sky clearing to reveal a faint sunset. Maya's thoughts were on Carla's testimony. If it landed, it could shatter Blake's case and Holt's control. The fight was at its peak, and Maya was ready to strike the final blow. The Atlanta dawn broke with a fragile clarity, the Fulton County Courthouse standing stark against a sky streaked with pink and gold. Inside Courtroom 3B, the sixth day of Jamal Carter's trial pulsed with a tension that felt like the calm before a storm's final roar. Maya Carter sat at the defendant's table, her navy blazer a quiet testament to her resolve, her FBI cybersecurity expertise, the damning audio of Officer Daniel Price, the memo exposing Captain Robert Gaines's cover-up, and the promise of Carla Evans's testimony had pushed the prosecution to the edge. But Maya knew the system fought hardest when cornered. Judge Raymond Holt's bias was a fading but stubborn shield, and Nathan Blake's cunning was a desperate beast, ready to claw back control. The truth was close, but it needed one last shove to break free. Jamal leaned toward her, his voice low, his eyes alight with a hope he hadn't dared feel in weeks. "Maya, this Carla, she's gonna seal it, right? I saw the jury yesterday. They're with us?" Maya's gaze flicked to the jury box, where the 12 faces were settling in, their expressions a mix of anticipation and weight. "They're leaning our way," she murmured, her tone steady but urgent. "But Holt's still a wild card, and Blake's got nothing to lose. Stay strong, Jamal." Her mind was on Carla Evans, the ex-cop who'd agreed to testify about Gaines's role in burying Price's complaints. Maya had met her at dawn, in a quiet park far from prying eyes, to go over her statement. Carla was resolute but terrified, her pension and reputation on the line. Maya had promised protection, but she knew the cost could be steep for both of them. The courtroom doors swung open, and Judge Holt strode in, his black robe a shadow of dwindling authority. His face was a mask of composure, but Maya caught the tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes darted to the packed gallery. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice cutting through the hum of whispers. Holt sat, gripping his gavel like a lifeline. "Murdoch Walsh, proceed," he said, his tone clipped. Ethan Walsh, the defense attorney, stood, his confidence forged in the fire of Maya's strategy. "Your Honor," Walsh began, "we call Carla Evans to the stand." The gallery buzzed, and Nathan Blake's face tightened, his earlier polish cracking. Maya watched as Carla walked in, a woman in her late 40s, her short gray hair framing a face etched with resolve and fear. Her steps were steady, but deliberate, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Jamal. She took the stand, swearing in with a voice that trembled but held. Walsh approached, his questions gentle but precise. "Ms. Evans, can you confirm your role in the Atlanta PD and your knowledge of Officer Price's disciplinary record?" Carla nodded, her voice gaining strength. "I was a lieutenant for 20 years. I reviewed complaints against officers, including Price. There were multiple reports of excessive force, but Captain Gaines ordered them dismissed. Against my recommendations." The gallery gasped, and the jury leaned forward, their attention locked. Walsh held up the memo. "Is this the document you provided, signed by Captain Gaines, authorizing those dismissals?" Carla's eyes flicked to the paper, then to Maya. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I kept a copy because I knew it wasn't right." The room erupted in murmurs, and Blake shot to his feet, his voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. This witness is biased, and her claims are unverified." Holt's gavel cracked, his face reddening. "Murdoch Walsh, you'd better have corroboration," he snapped. Walsh nodded, producing a digital log from the department's internal system, verified by Maya's FBI analysis. "This log confirms Ms. Evans's access to the complaints and Gaines's orders," Walsh said. Holt's eyes narrowed, but he waved Blake down. "Proceed," he said grudgingly. Carla's testimony unfolded, each word a hammer against Blake's case. She described Gaines's pressure to bury complaints, Price's pattern of targeting black drivers, and her own resignation when she could no longer stomach the corruption. "I'm here because I should have spoken up sooner," she said, her voice breaking as she looked at Jamal. "Mr. Carter didn't deserve what happened." The jury's faces softened, the young woman in the front row wiping her eyes. Maya felt a surge of hope, but Blake was ready to strike. On cross-examination, Blake pounced, his tone venomous. "Ms. Evans, isn't it true you left the department after a failed bid for promotion? That you're here to settle a grudge?" Carla's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. "I left because I couldn't stand by while good people got hurt," she said. "This isn't about me, it's about the truth." Blake pressed harder, painting her as a disgruntled has-been, but Carla's sincerity held firm, her words resonating with the jury. Holt, visibly frustrated, cut the questioning short. "Enough," he snapped. "Ms. Evans, you're dismissed." As Carla stepped down, her eyes met Maya's, a silent acknowledgement of the risk she'd taken. Maya gave her a subtle nod, her heart heavy with gratitude and responsibility. Blake, sensing the tide turning, launched into a desperate redirect. Addressing the jury, "This trial isn't about the department," he said, pacing. "It's about the defendant's actions." Don't be swayed by distractions. But his words felt hollow. The jury's attention drifting to Carla's testimony and the memo now in evidence. Maya seized the moment, rising to address Holt. Your Honor, the defense requests to recall the bystander video, since with Ms. Evans's timeline of Price's misconduct. Blake objected, but Holt, cornered by the jury's scrutiny, allowed it. The video played again, its impact amplified by Carla's words. The jury watched Price shiv Jamal, their expressions hardening. Maya caught the older man juror shaking his head, a sign the truth was sinking in. Holt, desperate to regain control, called a recess, his gavel striking with a hollow thud. In the hallway, Jamal turned to Maya, his voice trembling with emotion. Maya, that woman, she put everything on the line for me. I don't even know her. Maya's eyes softened, but her resolve was iron. She did it for the truth, Jamal. Same as us. We're almost there. Her phone buzzed a message from Marcus, department circling Carla. Watch her back. Maya's stomach twisted. Protecting Carla was now as critical as winning the case. Back in the courtroom, Walsh delivered a powerful summary, weaving Carla's testimony, the audio, and the video into a narrative of systemic abuse. Blake's rebuttal was fierce but frantic, his polish fading. Holt's face was a storm, his hands gripping the bench as he addressed the jury. You'll begin deliberations tomorrow, he said, his voice tight. This court expects a verdict based on evidence, not emotion. He banged his gavel and left, his exit swift, as if fleeing the truth he could no longer contain. Jamal turned to Maya, his eyes wide. We did it, right? They gotta see it now. Maya squeezed his shoulder, her voice steady. They see it, Jamal. Now we wait. As they left the courthouse, the Atlanta night was cool, the stars faint against the city's glow. Maya's thoughts were on Carla's safety and the jury's decision. The fight was at its peak, and she was ready for the final reckoning. The Atlanta morning broke with a quiet intensity. The Fulton County Courthouse standing like a sentinel under a sky of pale blue, streaked with wisps of gold. Inside Courtroom 3B, the seventh and final day of Jamal Carter's trial hummed with a tension that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Maya Carter sat at the defendant's table, her navy blazer a steadfast symbol of her unyielding resolve. Her FBI cybersecurity expertise, the damning audio exposing Officer Daniel Price's bias, the memo revealing Captain Robert Gaines's cover-up, and Carla Evans's courageous testimony had systematically dismantled the prosecution's case. But Maya knew the system's final act could be its most unpredictable. Judge Raymond Holt's bias, though battered, lingered like a stubborn ember, and Nathan Blake's desperation was a cornered animal, ready to lash out. The truth was close, but it demanded one last, resolute stand to claim victory. Jamal sat beside her, his broad shoulders squared, his deep brown eyes carrying a fragile hope tempered by weeks of relentless pressure. Maya, he whispered, his voice low and trembling with anticipation. This is it, isn't it? They've got to see the truth now, after everything. Maya's gaze flicked to the jury box, where the 12 jurors were filing in, their faces a complex tapestry of exhaustion, resolve, and quiet gravity. They see it, Jamal, she murmured, her tone steady but laced with urgency. But Holt's still got sway, and Blake's gonna fight dirty. Stay with me, okay? Her words were a lifeline, and Jamal nodded, his fingers twitching as he clasped his hands on the table. Maya reached under the table, her hand finding his, her touch grounding him through the storm of uncertainty. Her mind was racing, replaying the whirlwind of the trial. She'd spent the night in her small apartment, pacing, reviewing every piece of evidence, every testimony, every glance from the jury. Carla Evans's bravery had been the turning point, her words echoing in Maya's thoughts. I should have spoken up sooner. Maya had ensured Carla's safety, coordinating with Marcus Reed, her former FBI colleague, to keep watch over her. A text from Marcus at dawn had confirmed Carla was secure. But the weight of that responsibility lingered. This fight wasn't just for Jamal, it was for Carla, for every person, silenced by a system that protected its own over the truth. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and Judge Holt strode in, his black robe billowing like a fading storm cloud. His face was a mask of forced composure, but Maya caught the telltale signs of strain, the tightness in his jaw, the faint tremor in his hands as he gripped the gavel. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice booming off the wood-paneled walls. Holt settled into his high-backed chair, his eyes sweeping the packed gallery before landing on Maya with a cold, guarded intensity. The room was filled beyond capacity, reporters crowding the back, their pens scratching furiously, activists and supporters lining the benches, their presence a silent demand for justice. "The jury has reached a verdict," Holt said, his tone clipped, almost reluctant. "We'll hear it now." The gallery fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down like gravity itself. Maya's heart beat steadily, her calm exterior a shield against the torrent of emotions beneath: hope, fear, determination. She squeezed Jamal's hand tighter, feeling his pulse race under her fingers. He looked at her, his eyes wide, searching for reassurance. She gave him a subtle nod, her expression unwavering, a silent promise that they'd come too far to falter now. The jury foreperson, a middle-aged black woman with graying hair and a solemn demeanor, rose, clutching a folded piece of paper that seemed impossibly small for the life it held. She cleared her throat, her voice steady but soft, carrying the weight of 12 voices. "Your Honor, on the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant, Jamal Carter, not guilty." The words struck like lightning, and the courtroom erupted in a tidal wave of gasps, cheers, and murmurs. Jamal's breath hitched, his shoulders sagging as if a chain had been cut from his soul. His hands flew to his face, trembling, as tears welled in his eyes. Maya closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Relief flooded her, but it was tempered by the battle still ahead. She turned to Jamal, pulling him into a fierce embrace, her arms steady despite the emotion threatening to crack her composure. "You're free, Jamal," she whispered, her voice thick. "We did it." He clung to her, his voice breaking. "Maya, I don't know how to thank you. You saved me." Holt's gavel slammed down, the sound desperate against the swelling noise. "Order," he barked, his face flushed, his eyes darting between Maya and the gallery. "I will have order in this courtroom." The chaos subsided, but the energy remained, a current of triumph and defiance that no gavel could silence. Holt's lips pressed into a thin line, his hands gripping the bench as he addressed Jamal. "The defendant is discharged," he said, the words forced, each syllable heavy with reluctance. "This court is adjourned." He struck his gavel one final time and rose, his robe billowing as he exited, his steps swift, as if fleeing the truth he could no longer control. The courtroom exploded into motion the moment he was gone. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions about the verdict, about Maya's role, about the implications for the Atlanta PD. Supporters in the gallery embraced, some weeping, others chanting justice for Jamal. Maya shielded Jamal as they navigated the crowd, her arm around his shoulders, guiding him toward the hallway. The cool air outside the courtroom was a balm, but the weight of the moment clung to them. Jamal stopped, turning to Maya, his face radiant with a joy he hadn't felt in months. "Maya, I'm free," he said, his voice trembling with disbelief. "I'm really free," she smiled, pride swelling in her chest. "You always were, Jamal. We just had to make them see it." Outside, the courthouse steps were a sea of life activists waving signs reading, "Justice for Jamal." Reporters thrusting microphones forward, community members cheering as Maya and Jamal emerged. The Atlanta skyline loomed behind, its glass towers catching the morning light. Maya paused, letting Jamal take in the moment, his face a canvas of relief and newfound strength. A young woman from the crowd approached, tears in her eyes, and pressed a small handwritten note into Jamal's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Your story gives us hope." Jamal clutched the note, his eyes shining, and nodded, unable to speak. Weeks later, Maya sat in her modest Atlanta apartment, papers and case files spread across her dining table, a laptop glowing with emails from advocacy groups. The trial had ignited a firestorm public outrage over Price's actions, and Gaines's cover-up had sparked internal investigations within the Atlanta PD, with calls for broader reform echoing across the city. Carla Evans, now under Maya's quiet protection, had become a beacon for whistleblowers, her courage inspiring a wave of officers to come forward with their own stories of corruption. Maya had taken on a new role, balancing her FBI work with advocacy, speaking at community forums, collaborating with legal scholars, and lending her voice to the growing movement for accountability. One evening, her phone buzzed, pulling her from a draft speech. It was Jamal, his voice bright with a lightness she hadn't heard since they were kids. "Maya, I spoke at a youth center today," he said, excitement spilling through the line. "Told em everything about the trial, about you, about standing up." They listened, Maya. Really listened. Maya leaned back, a smile spreading across her face. "That's huge, Jamal," she said, pride warming her voice. "You're giving them something to believe in." He laughed, a sound of pure hope. "Learn from you, sis. They want to hear you speak next time." You and Maya chuckled. Always, months later, Maya stood at a podium in a packed Atlanta auditorium, the stage lights bright against a sea of faces, activists, students, families, all gathered for a panel on justice reform. She wasn't here as an FBI agent, but as a sister, a witness, a fighter. The crowd hushed as she began, her voice steady, resonating with a quiet power. "Justice isn't a gift," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "It's a demand. My brother's story is one of thousands, but it's proof that when we stand together, when we refuse to be silenced, we can bend the arc of history toward truth." The audience erupted in applause, some standing, others wiping tears. Maya stood still, feeling the weight of her words, the echoes of Jamal's laughter, Carla's courage, the jury's verdict. As she stepped off the stage, the applause swelling, a young activist approached. Clutching a notebook, "Agent Carter," she said, her voice earnest. "Your story, it's changing things. What's next?" Maya smiled, her resolve unshaken. "We keep fighting," she said simply. "For everyone who's still waiting for justice." She walked into the Atlanta night, the skyline glowing, a city alive with possibility. The road ahead was long, but Maya carried a spark of hope, not just for Jamal, not just for Carla, but for a future where truth could rise unbroken. And she was ready.